Over to you, Phoebe.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the film that we watched last week, which is Martin Fritsch's An Adventurer's Life is Hard, which was released in 1941. So my topic today is I'm going to outline the characteristic features of the life of the Czechs under Nazi occupation with reference to Mary Hyman's book. This is just to signpost what I'm going to be speaking about, so the historical context of the occupation and how it started, the theme of control within the film which links to the life of the Czechs, and then 4 features of life which are encompassed in politics, culture, religion, and the economy and war effort. So the first one I'm going to be speaking about is the origins of Nazi occupation, which began when with the 1938 Sudeten crisis, when Hitler demanded the annexation of the Sudetenland, which is a border region of Czechoslovakia. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement was made, in which Britain and France agreed to hand over the Sudetenland to Hitler. And then on the 15th of March 1939, the Nazi troops marched unopposed into Prague, and on the next day, the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was formed, which was Czechia, and then Slovakia was made as its own fascist state.
Before you go on, can I just say, look at that map, how they basically really destroyed that country. And then, of course, as I mentioned in some other classes, after 1945, or in 1945, all these 3 million Germans from these areas were deported. And one maybe interesting thing that I want to point out, there were people, kind of immigrants into these areas. In fact, I have a friend in Prague whose grandmother lived in some kind of Czechoslovak colony in Romania, and they were invited to go back, and they kind of sort of settled in Šumava, which is basically in the southwest corner of the country. But interestingly, if I may point this out, to this very day, and it's kind of almost a century later, these areas are deprived. And it's interesting, there was, as I probably also mentioned here, 2 weeks ago, there was a general election, and the normal right of center government in the Czech Republic fell exactly because these people in these areas feel impoverished. Especially that if you see in Moravia what a big bit it is. And that is really quite, was kind of industrialized, old kind of, I don't know, steelworks or whatever. And it's interesting that this seems to be a kind of legacy still sort of with which the country is grappling now. And maybe, I mean, you don't know to what extent I mentioned this, that sort of an oligarch party of Andrej Babiš won it 2 weeks ago, and he aligned himself with a couple of absolutely minor political parties because he needs to get more than 100 seats in parliament. It's a 200-seat parliament, and they are total maniacs. And one of them, who was supposed to have been appointed foreign secretary, a newspaper discovered, did I mention this? A newspaper discovered over this past weekend his incredible statements on social networks, which are allegedly erased, like Obama is a nigger whose the only thing that he could be doing is selling drugs in Washington streets, and various other incredibly racist kind of stuff. So there was this kind of storm in the teacup over the past weekend, today being Tuesday. It's his, well, I don't know whether to what extent this has subsided, because of course this oligarch who won is very unpleased by this, and he actually called this particular man from this minor crazy party to discuss it, and he denied it and whatever, and he obviously is not going to make him foreign secretary. But it's turned the whole politics in the current Czech Republic into total comedy, and I'm sorry to have made this kind of intercession, but it's interesting how it is still related, you are historians, to something that happened sort of 89 years ago. So, and then of course in 1945. I shut up, please go on, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the theme of control in the film. And so we can see the writer, Crispin, has an increasing lack of control, which culminates in the end to the police kind of revealing that it was all their plot. And it's, it's their idea to just prove a point to him that he should be censoring his writing and speaking about good people instead of adventurers. So I've got a few stills from the film. The first being when he finds the wallet in his pocket after he's stolen it, and that's when it kind of starts spiraling out of control when he gets involved in the criminal activity with Fred Flock. The second being the inspector being in his house uninvited and unexpected, which shows that Crispin has an increasing lack of control over his private life as well. And then the third and fourth pictures being when he is trying to recover the money for the police, but then discovers that after he's seen it in the briefcase, a few minutes later, it's no longer in the briefcase. And then most importantly, the picture at the top is showing the ID check, which is especially important because that did actually happen in the Protectorate after the Reichsprotector Heydrich was assassinated. So there's another one when it shows that the police he says he's interested in anything, which is going beyond the limits of what you would expect a police officer to do. So now on to how the life of the Czechs was politically. When the Protectorate was first formed, Reich citizenship was automatic for German speakers who previously belonged to the Sudeten German Party.
Can I say one other thing also? Sorry for another interruption. One interesting thing. Those Czech citizens who were speaking German were, as you rightly say, eligible for Reich citizenship. But do you know what this also meant? Because they were now citizens of the Nazi Deutsches Reich, they were duty-bound to be sent to the front. So there was a weird, unexpected advantage for Czech-speaking people in the Protectorate, because they wouldn't be obviously sent as German soldiers to fight the Russians. Yeah. But the Germans living in the Czech Protectorate were sent to the front. So amazing. Anyway, go on.
And then other people who couldn't speak German were known as the subjects of the Protectorate. There were troops also stationed there, and this altered internal transport, the postal service, and communications. And then on the 21st of March 1939, the Czechoslovakian parliament was dissolved, and the two Czech-speaking political parties were formed into one, called the Czech National Alliance. This had overwhelming support, likely mostly because of the growing support of fascism in the Protectorate. There were political resistance groups, as I've named on the boards, but at first these were small and they were quite weak and acted mainly within the law, although there was another group called the UVOD, or the Central Leadership of Home Resistance.
There's one other interesting point. There was a historian, literary theoretician, Francophile. His name was Václav Černý, obviously incredibly sort of long since dead, and he wrote this kind of memoir about sort of life in various parts of Czechoslovakia, certainly, and he mentioned this thing about these resistant groups in his memoir from the Nazi occupation, and he basically says with hindsight that it was really stupid because, as you're saying, they didn't do much, but the problem is, he said, if you want to fight a fascist regime, what you should do is you set up a quick ad hoc group, attack the regime, and then dissolve it, right? So that the regime can't discover it. These people set up these permanent resistant kind of things which existed for long years, and obviously, if the Gestapo arrested somebody from them, from a member, they would torture them, they would obviously get at the others. So it was incredibly, as this man Václav Černý says in his memoir, inefficient and stupid, frankly. Okay, go on.
Well, in relation to that, actually, the exiled ex-president was involved in the UVOD, which was later involved in the assassination of Reichsprotector Heydrich. There were also political gestures of national spirit. So some people put bouquets of flowers at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and the performance of the patriotic poem My Fatherland had a 15-minute standing ovation. On the 28th of October 1939, there were demonstrations for Czechoslovakian Independence Day, which led to the injury of policemen and the medical student who's there a picture of on the slide.
Yeah, Jan Opletal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this led to his funeral on the 15th of November, in which people went to peacefully respect the funeral, but later the Secretary of State's car was overturned and his driver was beaten up, which then led to people from the administration attacking back at those protesters. So this was the day after the funeral. The Gestapo raided the Prague Student Union, and some students were even taken from their dormitories. And in total, 1,200 students were sent to camps.
Yes, and also they abolished universities because Czechs do not. But anyway, that Jan Opletal died on the 17th of November, and that later on became International Students' Day, incidentally. I don't know whether that is still whether people still know about this, but nevertheless, that was it, declared it because of his death, International Students' Day. So anyway.
And then 9 student union reps were also shot.
And I have to, sorry, I'm destroying your PowerPoint presentation, but another thing, how everything is connected with everything. On the 17th of November, 89, right? 50 years after this, the official, is that true? Yeah, it is. The official Czechoslovak Socialist Union of Youth organized a regime-permitted demonstration in the memory of Jan Opletal. And it was about 2 weeks after the Berlin Wall fell. There was still communism in Czechoslovakia. And this official student demonstration developed into a total million people demonstration against the regime. And so the communist regime fell in Czechoslovakia on 17th of November of 1989. As a result, so it is all connected with the death of Jan Opletal on the 17th of November 1939. I don't know whether people realize this, but anyway, you see how things are connected. Okay, go
on. In September 1941, Konstantin von Neurath, who was the Reichsprotector, was replaced by Reinhard Heydrich, who was known to be brutal even by Nazi standards, and he declared martial law. Heydrich was assassinated and he died on the 4th of June 1942, which led to even more backlash from the administration, which meant that routes to and from Prague were blocked, and everyone over 15, Czechs over 15 needed ID cards, and if they didn't show up to have them stamped regularly, they would be shot by the firing squad. In the search for the assassins, 1,357 people were executed. So that sums up political life. To move on to social and cultural aspects of life, there was a new flag brought in to represent the Protectorate. So you can see it in the top there. And the Minister for Culture and Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, took over Barrandov Studios, which was a Czech film studio. And you can see the Nazi influence of film through the 1941 film Jan Simbura, which showed a Jewish innkeeper having his inn set fire to, and he was chased out of the village. Czech film production also declined from 41 films in 1939 to only 9 in 1944. Jazz was also dwindling as an influence because Nazis hated the origins in Jewish and Black communities. And I thought something was interesting in that Chad Bryant, who's a historian, he mentions about language islands in which it would be groups of German-speaking people would live amongst Czech neighbours, and the Czechs would kind of alienate them because they were so angry at the Nazi administration in the Protectorate. German soon became the official language, and in September 1939, the road signs were all changed to have German first and then the Czech translation underneath. Similarly, they had to switch to driving on the right-hand side when they previously drove on the left.
Yes, this is interesting. Like in the interwar period, like here in Britain, people in Czechoslovakia drove on the left. Do you know why people originally drove or rode even horses on the left? No? Really not? Historians what?
Isn't it jousting?
Yes, because when you were in the Middle Ages, it was dangerous to go on the roads, right? On horseback. So you had your sword, and you had to be prepared to fight the thieves. And so when you were going, you would actually need your right hand. Most people are right-handed rather than left-handed. So obviously people rode on the left so that they could fight oncoming danger, right? So this is why everywhere originally people drove on the left. And of course, I suppose, you know, I think Sweden sometime in the 70s switched over from left riding to right, and it was incredibly complicated, and all these sort of instructions and campaigns and everything. Well, no, in the Nazi Germans in Czechoslovakia in September 39, just we told them, from tomorrow you're going on the right. That was that. But of course, it has to be said there were much fewer cars in September 39 than say in the 70s. Okay. Anyway.
People also resisted socially in that they refused to go out to attend celebrations for Hitler's birthday.
When was Hitler's birthday? 20th of April. These things mercifully are so forgotten now. Anyway, all right, go
on. And so they paid fines because they'd rather pay a fine than attend the birthday of Hitler. So on to religious life. The Czech National Alliance Party excluded Jewish people from membership. In July 1939, Jewish people were banned from cinemas and theatres. And in January 1940, they weren't allowed to do national service, although they were forced to do obligatory labour instead. In April 1940, Jewish people were told that they couldn't sell property or start new businesses, and they had to label their businesses as Jewish, which obviously made people boycott them even more. In December 1941, Theresienstadt was opened, which was a Jewish ghetto, which is like a village where Jewish people would live under really poor conditions before they would go on to concentration camps. There were films produced there to try and show propaganda that they were actually utopian, which in reality they obviously weren't. And after these films were produced, they would send the Jewish people off to Auschwitz. There was also a staged visit from the Red Cross to again try and show that this place was fine to live in, which it wasn't. And in totality, 140,000 Jewish people passed through there on the way to concentration camps. And then Hugo Haas, who was an actor in some of the other films we've seen, was also dismissed from the National Theatre because of his Jewish relations.
And he was very lucky to be allowed to actually that's Heinrich Hess to end up in America. But I have to point out here that the behavior of non-Nazi countries like Britain and the United States was absolutely outrageous. They really, although they must have known that these Jews' lives were threatened, they just basically were incredibly reluctant to give them the visas. And so those Jews died because Britain and the United States wouldn't allow them into their countries. It was the Pavel Haas, that jazz composer, died. And I've got a formerly very famous Voice of America reporter of the Czech service. His name is Julian Nagli. I think he's retired now, and he lives in the Czech Republic. And he was putting something on Twitter, I think, a couple of days ago, saying, my father, who lives in America, has had his 101st birthday. He obviously got his visa, and I put under it, he was very lucky, obviously Jewish family. And Julian Nagli wrote, yes, it took him 2 years to get he was apparently a student in Britain, and he applied for a visa to go to America, and it took him 2 years to get that visa, and he was very lucky that he was already waiting for it in Britain. The rest of his family was sent into concentration camps and killed. So just to point out that Britain is obsessed with immigration and people are escaping also from similarly dangerous places. America as well. Trump is absolutely maniacal about it. And these Western countries are just as disgraceful as they were in the 30s. We shouldn't forget that. Go on.
So, on to how the economy affected people's lives. The Reich completely absorbed the economy of the Protectorate. They didn't care at all about the output or the people, obviously. They needed the resources for the war effort. So, this led to a 33% arable land loss and a 50% coal production loss. There were business boycotts as well. Obviously, I spoke about how Nazis would boycott Jewish businesses. And also wartime rationing and shortages of consumer goods, which was especially offensive for people living in the Protectorate because there's many accounts of people saying how deeply they were affected by it because the reason that they were rationing and working so hard for this war was because of the people that were forcing them to, who were living in better conditions than most of them. Reinhard Heydrich's economic plan, his aim was to divide the nation, so he would give farmers and hard workers preferential treatment over other people. And that's a picture of him now.
Mm.
In conclusion, we've seen pretty much every aspect of life. There's repression and there's a lack of identity and freedom. Although some people might have thought it wasn't as bad at first, it soon led to a complete suppression of culture, identity, and lots of types of freedom. The absorption of the economy led to people living really bad qualities of life, and the media censorship and ID checks led to a considerable lack of freedom. Resistance wasn't tolerated at all. They were often met with great force. You can see after the assassination of the Reich Protector, which links again back to the film, because we can see that the state has a total control of life and reality of the people living under it. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very good references. It was very well prepared again. Thank you. I'm very pleased. You've been very. Could you close it so that we can see the other one? Typical historian. The other one?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I also have a presentation for today.
Oh, okay. Right. Good. And have you got it?
Yeah.
All right.
I just don't have a visual presentation.
You don't have a what? PowerPoint.
Yeah, PowerPoint.
Okay, that's all right. I hope we can. I've been talking too much. What's the time? I hope it'll all fit in. But I was looking at it and thinking, what's the time? 27. All right. Okay. If it doesn't fit in, we'll have to do it next week. Okay. All right.
I'm also doing a presentation on the Adventure of Tard and focusing on the representation of Czech life in the film. Just a bit of context, Martin Freak, the director, born in 1992, died in 1968 of a suicide attempt, partially to do with a cancer diagnosis, but also to do with the Warsaw invasion of Czechoslovakia, which I think just puts out his political standpoint to begin with. That it might not have been thorough in the films, but he had a very political mindset. He'd used previous films as social commentary. He said a lot about anti-war stuff. He said a lot about poverty. And Haynes, who's one of the people that I read on, highlights him as one of the major influences of a Czech comedy tradition in how they went about it and the kind of sartorial way they did it. Czechoslovakia at the time, it had been split into Bohemia, Moravia, and the Slovak Independent Republic. Reich systems were created, and a Czech cabinet was allowed, but had a German overseer for a short amount of time. There was German troops present in the country from 1939. There was an attempted government in exile. The previous leader of the Czechoslovakia moved to Paris and then later to London and continually attempted to create a exiled government, although it wasn't allowed by France or Britain when he lived there. There was a protest in 1939 following the death of a student, which led to the shutting down of universities and institutions and the disbanding of unions. So you can see the like strong theme of like a police state and political control that was happening in 1939 leading into 1941. The introduction of Heydrich as the Reich's protector in 1941, same year as the film was produced. He was well known as being violent even among the Nazis, which is very impressive. So he introduced another level of fear to the country and the population politically. Slovakia, separately, was introducing its own Jewish ghettoization and Roma expulsion, and had its own independent fascist movement that was aligning with the Nazis. The plot of the film, the main character Charles Crispin is a crime author. His character comes to life and involves him in his crimes that he's trying to commit. The character Fred Flock steals his money, steals his love interest, involves him in a plot for a teenager who's read his books to rob a bank. And the plot is finalized with a plot twist that Fred Flock was a police superintendent who was tricking him to convince him to stop writing about crime. And that theme of police control and censorship of media is mainly what I've looked into. There's also a lot of stuff when you read Hames again about the use of physical and absurdist comedy that Frick brings into the film that says a lot about the attitude of Czechoslovakia at the time, that people were both attempting resistance but also dealing with the fear and the sorrow of it through kind of absurdist comedy. The primary message I got from the film that I thought applied well to Czechoslovakia at the time was the massive police presence. Crispin is threatened with arrest multiple times, although he does commit crimes. He steals a wallet. He steals it unaware of the crime that he's committing, and he's involved in a bank robbery without his consent. So the fact that he is threatened of arrest over not having his ID, he's threatened arrest when the police break into his home, and when he's suspected of robbing the bank with no evidence. It relates to the introduction of the Gestapo in Czechoslovakia in 1939, and how I think Martin Frick was representing the suffocation that the Czech people were feeling. There was an arrest in the film, in the pub scene. The group of men who were going to be in the pub brawl got arrested en masse. I think this is really interesting. There's a complete lack of reaction from other people in the pub to a mass arrest. So that shows, I think, the normality and the subjugation through the police state that people were feeling. Also, Crispin is introduced to the underworld, which I think relates heavily to the resistant movements that were in Bohemia and Moravia at the time, like the VOD. And I think the fact that he's trying to get into them, the police seem to be everywhere around them. It shows kind of the lack of space for what would be considered crime under the Nazis at the time. There's a lot of secondary messaging. I really focused on the plot twist at the end. It seems just kind of crazy that the police would have so many men tricking an author into not writing about crimes. That I suggested that it could have been a form of censorship. Either that Frick's film was brought to the Nazi system and he was told to change the ending, or that he was commenting on censorship himself. I drew a little diagram there that the film has an antagonistic police presence and sends messages about the dangers of media already with the teenager robbing the bank. But the film's ending cuts so sharply that the cops become the heroes and make the idea of uncontrolled media the enemy. And this, whether or not it was an edited version of the ending, it sends a massive message about like the lack of voice that people could have in Czechoslovakia under Nazi control, and completely undoes a lot of the primary messaging about the criminal underworld being able to exist. It maybe suggests that like resistance parties weren't able to exist and that the police was in them the whole time anyway. And it suggests a complete police control of the state at every level. The film, however, is a crime comedy drama, so it can't say everything about the state of Czechoslovakia in 1941. Slovakia in 1939 was invaded by the Gestapo. It was completely taken control of, and its Reich Protector was introduced. Similarly, in 1939, Slovakia was given independence and went on a similar but slightly more Christian veil of fascism to Germany. Slovakia had, by 1939, its own concentration camps and its own secret police that made it not on the same brand, but on a similar level to the Nazi regime. In Czechia, in Bohemia and Moravia, there was a massive suppression of the German population. Czech citizens were sent to German concentration camps up until 1941, where they built their own. There was student movements were sent to concentration camps, and the Jewish population who weren't sent to concentration camps were moved into forced work to build German artillery and the German industry. Heydrich, who became the Reich Protector, had a plan that Bohemia, Moravia and Slovakia would act as industrial sites for this like Reich empire, and so the industry was being converted in that way. And the main fortress, which was the concentration camp, which was created in Czechoslovakia, was it started its creation in November 1941 when the film was released. It was already, the Jewish population had already been like ghettoized and forced into one area of Prague. The area where the concentration camp was introduced then got evacuated, so the Jewish population could be moved in and trapped in its own way. I think, in conclusion, the film touches a lot on what it's about. The film is about crime, the film is about the underworld of Czechoslovakia at the time, it's about the influence of the police. It says a lot about the feelings, more indirectly, I think, that people were scared, that people were terrified, that people felt like the police state were on every level of control within the country. And I think there's a lot of double meaning in how the police act and whether or not the ending was swapped and censored or not. But it struggles to say a lot of stuff about how the culture of the country was affected, how the economy of the country was affected, and anything on how Slovakia was being treated and was acting at the time.
Thank you very much. Also very good. I would just like to add that it's interesting. It's an entertainment escapist film, but nevertheless we see all these indirect influences in this. One other thing is, strangely, the Nazis were, as I keep saying, against jazz music, but there was a kind of obviously protest kind of thing here, that there's a lot of jazz music in this film. Thank you very much. Over to you. Do we still have time to do it?
Yeah, we're on 30 now.
Yeah, good. Yes, come on. Maybe we can close this as well so that it doesn't actually, the light, that doesn't produce the light there. Okay. Oh, even if I put it off, what happens? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so good morning everyone. My name is Volodymyr, and the topic of my presentation outlines the characteristic features of the life of Czechs under the Nazi occupation and use the appropriate chapter from Mary Hayman's work. Uh, Today's presentation plan is a short introduction about the situation which was in Czechoslovakia in 1938. Then we'll talk about some political situation, economy of Czechia, social life, cultural life, some Czech resistance, and conclusion. To prepare this presentation, I used a section from Mary Hayman's work, in which she talks about the history of Bohemia and Moravia lands that in this that we know as protector. Yes, thank you. And Slovakia. The author outlines the period from 1938 to 1935, and in this section you can find some information about the political, social, and economic life of Czechs and Slovaks. View the course of events during the occupation, and most importantly, the characteristic of features of Czechs' life under the Nazi occupation. As I said, I want to make a small introduction to describe the establishment of Nazi power in Czechoslovakia. After the Munich Agreement in 1938, Czechoslovakia lost the Sudet lands, and a few months after this, Hitler set a demand for the president of Czechoslovakia, and Czechoslovakia was divided. Slovakia declared independence when the remains of some Czech lands became a protectorate. Okay, so if about the political situation, the president of Czechoslovakia was Emil Hácha, and as I said, on March 14, he accepted the Hitler's ultimatum, and he became a president of a new protector country, and this protector country, someone maybe said that Czech Republic just became the land of the Third Reich, but however, unlike the Sudetenland, which became part of Germany, the protectorate was not part of Germany. According to the decree of the Führer on March 16, 1939, which established in protectorate, the territories of Bohemia and Moravia officially taken under the guardianship of the Reich in external times were transferred to German administration only temporarily. Instead of full control of the these Czech lands by Germany, Germany left certain rights to the Czech president. Namely, the president of state retained the right to appoint cabinet ministers, but only it had to be confirmed by Reich protector. And the first Reich protector was Konstantin von Neurath, but he was not too cruel, so he was replaced by Reinhard Heydrich. And Germany did not completely dominate the political life of Czechs, and Germany wanted to show to the whole world that this is not an occupation at all, and because they still have some rights, and it like for the Germany wanted to show for whole the world that it's not an occupation and it's like a country. And also there was two political parties for Czech-speaking population, but later it was reduced to only one, a mass party that called the Czech National Alliance, and many people joined this party to be considered Czechs, or simply for their own protection, because at the beginning of the occupation, all German, all people who lived in this area and like spoke German language, they became a citizen of the Reich, and there was a problem because Reich citizen was sent to the war, to the front line, and many German people like didn't want to become Germans. So yes, they joined some parties or wanted to become Czechs to avoid the military. And this situation changed after the fall of Paris, when the Czechs began to present themselves as Germans, because they thought that that's all. France fallen, and Germany will took everything, and it's better to join Germany to protect. So, and in general, the political situation in Czech Republic was predetermined by the Reich protector, and during the occupation, the Czechs did not have political freedom. If we talk about the economy of Czech Republic, economy had to be fully aligned with the Third Reich, and after the establishment of regime, the protectorate gained great control over the economy within the country, through some limiting the economic freedom of citizens, and by the beginning of, and by the way, there was some problem in economy because lack of materials and because of lack of food or other supplies, and in this book there was here. By the beginning of the year, a Serb living in Prague complained that the economy was such a mess that it was no longer possible to buy shoes or even sheets or nails or shower or coal. And in addition to the deficit that was in Czech, there was every materials or money was sent to the Reich. And many factories also in Czech worked to the Reich power, and even the protectorate stated that it's better to it's better to make one economic system, German and Czech system, or like one economic system, and to make Czech economy part of the German economy, but in the end it didn't happen, and also there was a high inflation in Czech, and people had some problems, as I said, with some products and deficit, and it's not the same as it was in the film. Like they had a lot of like money and some parties, but in reality there was things like this. And about the also social life, at the beginning of the occupation, some Czechs was like oppressed by other nations, because for Germany Czechs were like considered like enslavers, namely the Slovak and the Sudetians, and that's why Czechs had like a bit of oppressed, but over time, due to the resettlement of Germans, Czechs land because of also Czech lands to Germany. Czechs consisted most of the population, and one von Neurath agreed that theoretically the most perfect solution to the ethnic problem in the protectorate would be the complete expulsion of all Czechs from the country and it's settled by Germans. But in practice, he argued that this would be impossible. But even though all public organizations were invited or subordinated to the occupation authorities, the Czechs preserved their identity in a quiet way, and they also secretly celebrated some holidays and preserved their culture. And if we like to talk about cultural life, the Czechs tried to define their culture during the occupation, and it's about some buckets of flowers began to appear on the tomb of the unknown soldiers and on the monument to Haas on the old town square and at the Wood Wilson monument and the main train station. Also, there were other signs of Czech indignation, like the official celebrations of Hitler's birthday, and Czechs preferred to pay a small fine and stay at home rather than participate in these celebrations. Or there some concert patriotic symphonic poem Mavlast that it's a nationalist it was a like nationalist of the struggle of Czech culture were not just like that but a response to the attack of German culture on Czech culture, and the Reich authorities tried to make German the only language in the Czech Republic, but they had problems even to make German one of the official languages in Czech. And also they changed the flag of Czech, and they rules the road were changed, and so they tried to control every cultural life in Czechia, but Czech also tried to save their culture by the quiet way, this quiet protesting, and also there was a lot of propaganda. For example, newspaper editors were summoned to weekly press briefing to make it clear what should be written and what should not. With such actions, Germans tried to weaken the culture of Czech Republic to introduce their own culture on their lands. In her chapter, Mary Heman calls one Czech. You must see how the names in your village are written in German. You must hear the names of the tram stops shouted out in German. You constantly live in anxiety, constantly afraid of what the next day will bring. So there was a really hard life under the occupation because Nazi Germans, they tried to break the Czech culture spirit and some identity spirit, but because of some Czech, because they tried to save their culture, and because of also their some sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, you summarized it quite well. Thank you very much. Let's stop it now. Okay.